meeting. I am Felice Farber. I'm the co-chair of the Budget Committee, along with Billy Freeland, my fellow co-chair. Tonight, we are tasked with reviewing and commenting on the mayor's preliminary budget for fiscal year 2024. And we are tasked with, as part of the charter, of commenting on the mayor's response to our district needs statement. So, Will, if you don't mind, would you click on the info statements on the preliminary budget just to provide an overview of what we are tasked with doing? So as it says, we have by February 15th, which is 30 days after the release of the preliminary budget, we must comment on the preliminary budget, and we'll review the items that the city's responded to our district needs statement and our priorities. The statement should reflect the public's testimony if anyone wants to comment today. We'll review the items that are in the preliminary budget in our district needs statement and the city's response to that. So if there aren't any questions about this and what the process is, we can move on to the district needs statement and the city's response. Billy, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that just about touched on it. And you mentioned our letter of comment.
I did not. So why don't you add to that?
Sure. So what we typically do is we take this letter that every year we send over to the mayor. We address it to the mayor. And actually, let me move it to the screen where I have a camera, so it looks like I'm looking at the camera. And essentially, we write on behalf of our community board. And typically, these letters to the mayor, they're in response to the preliminary budget that Felice just mentioned. And we often express, frankly, it's often our disappointment with, some of the responses that we get from the city. I think it's well known at this point that we submit, our statement of district needs and so forth, and we lay out our priorities, but often the city provides kind of rote replies or disregards what our priorities are. So this letter is always an opportunity to, express our disappointment and to put in more concrete terms, what it is that we'd like to see from the city agencies. So, we'll be going through that as we think about our district needs. Felice, did I capture that more or less? Or
that's perfect. Thank you, Billy. Will, can you now go to the city's response to the district needs statement? Okay, and we can go on, start at the top and go through each of the items. Every year we rate adding additional seats, public seats to the community is a top priority. The city's response this year is that they don't think we have an identified seat need. If we look at some of the data that the city has, or the Department of Education has available, it does indicate a decline in the number of students in the district. But if there's anyone on here who has more of direct involvement in the school seats and school need in this district, I would welcome any input you have onto the city's response. Okay, so we'll keep moving on, and if anyone has any data or any response to the city's comment about our district needs statement and any additional issues to feedback, I'd appreciate that. In terms of public housing, we talked about the need for repairs and upgrades to Isaac Houses and Holmes Towers, which are the two NYCHA buildings in our district. As we know, public housing is historically underfunded, and there are lots of reasons for that. If we look at some of the data, the number of open work orders in both Holmes and Isaacs have increased in the past couple of years. The city's response is that we need to contact local elected officials for appropriations, which seems a little inappropriate to me, but if anyone has anything they want to add to that or to the city's response, please chime in or raise your hand. Oh, Michelle, I see you have your hand up.
Mohit, Michelle, and Judy all have their hands up.
Okay, why don't we go to Mohit first?
Go ahead.
Hey, just quickly on the prior item regarding school seats. So the city seems to be pointing to like the census, the number of students who live in the district. But since we are a school choice district, citywide, where students can attend schools and in District 2, even if they don't live here, I think the appropriate metric is the number of students who are applying for seats in District 2, which is very, very high, particularly at the high school level. And so there's most certainly a need to allocate more seats in District 2 to accommodate the demand for schools that students have. And what's happening in part is because of the citywide demand for seats in District 2, students who do live here are getting bumped a little bit since many of our schools no longer have a district priority. And so I think those kind of reasons combine to showcase why we need more seats here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. That's very helpful. Michelle?
Yes, that is very valuable to add, Mohit. That's important. The other thing is, even though their stats show a decrease in the number of students in the district, do they take into consideration classroom size? Because if you had a classroom size in the 30s, which we did, and now because there's a decline in the number of students, it goes down to 29, I would still say that we need schools and school seats in this district. So the fact that the number and the population went down does not necessarily mean that the number of seats should go down.
So when I looked at some of the data from some of the school ranking websites, the number of students per class were in the low 20s, which is kind
of good. If that's good. I mean, if that's true, then that's very good. It hadn't been that way for a while. So, and that's elementary, middle, and high school.
It was elementary. I couldn't find the data for
middle and high school.
But I do think Mohit's comment about the availability of seats on the high school level is certainly very, very true. I'm not sure how the data lays out for some of the elementary and middle school seats.
Well, if you're a recent applicant, you would know just by just from experience that it's true. They're sending kids all over the city because they don't have enough room on the Upper East Side.
Mohit, so the data you provided for the high school level, is that also the case in the middle school?
It's a great question. I'm not sure. I can try finding out. There were a slew of news articles in the fall about how the District 2 students who live in the Upper East had the biggest drop in matching rate into local high schools. And so students who live in District 2 seem to be the most, disadvantageous is the wrong word, but the most affected by not having enough seats available locally relative to demand. And that's certainly true at the high school level. I can pull up those news articles, but it's been a real problem there. I don't know. I don't have data on the elementary or middle school levels, but it's going to be worse at the high school level since students at that age are more willing to travel across district boundaries. But my suspicion is that our schools at the elementary and middle school levels are very well regarded and that there is demand there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Judy?
Yes, on the schools, let me go back a little bit. The grade schools are zoned by district. So that I'm aware of, I'm not sure that the grade schools in our district have the tremendous waiting lists that they had 6 to 8 to 10 years ago. Certainly not when I was co-chair of the education committee. I mean, we had wait lists all over the place. We got 5 new schools during that time. The middle school, our middle school is Robert Wagner, which has 2 schools, 2 sections rather. One, every child who lives in District 8, who's a middle schooler, can go to Robert Wagner. But if you qualify for, I don't know if it's by test or if they look at your grades or how they do it. If you qualify, they also have a section for special students. And the principal kind of bounces those students around from one section to the other. If you're in the section for the better students and your grades go down, you're going to find yourself in the other section of Robert Wagner. So the middle school kids have a place to go to school in Community District 8. The high schools, however, and many middle schoolers don't want to go to Robert Wagner. They may apply to a middle school, or a parent may send their child to another school in another district, which they can do. But at high school level, certainly the only high school that I'm aware of that we have is Eleanor Roosevelt. And that is not specifically, when it was opened, I think 1/3 of the students had to come from District 8. Now I think that rule has changed completely. I think students from all over can apply. So if we're asking for a high school in Community District 8, I think we need to ask for a high school for Community District 8 students. Otherwise, putting a high school, another building here, okay, I'm going to build you a big high school. That isn't going to guarantee that our students are going to go there. There is one other school in the district, and that's Julia Richmond Educational Complex, that has 6 schools, one pre-K up through 8th grade, the name Ella Baker, 4 high schools, and 1 middle school for special students. That is not a regular district school. You'll have to forgive me. I forget. If Elizabeth Rose was here, she would know. I forget the name of that school. It classifies in a totally different district. So whether you live here or not, it doesn't automatically mean that you can get into one of those 4 high schools. And each one of those schools is small, and it's specializes in a different area. Like one of the schools is for music and arts, and one is for technology. I forget what the other 2 are. So just to give you a heads up. So if we might want to change the wording on that, if we want the schools here, built here in our district, if we want them for the children in our district, because that's not how DOE does it.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Appreciate that. Rebecca?
Hi, sorry, I just got home, so I'm signing in, and apologies if I missed this part of the discussion. Did we look at our previous requests for this, the wording and their responses? Because I think this is the first time they kind of said directly no. I think it was always further study or something
I
to that
think they
effect.
have previously said further study. So you are
Did
correct.
we change anything in
No.
in what we asked for?
No, I don't think we did. But we can, I'll go back and take a look at it, but I don't think we changed. I think we have gone back and forth between just saying pre-K through others. Then here we broke it out and talked about the need for a new high school. And so their response was here, no, as opposed to it needs further study.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good thing to think about for all of the responses that we're unhappy with, is kind of look at it in context of the history of how long we've been asking for it, and, you know, the responses over the years. Because I think maybe we can say for certain things, you know, we've been asking for this for X number of years.
Yeah,
All right, I'm just got home, so I'll be on Zoom shortly.
Okay, thanks. And next is Moet.
Let me know if you want me to stop talking about education. Just three things based off the last few comments regarding how the city was a little bit more definitive this time around saying no. The mayor and his administration have been pretty aggressive at pointing to the citywide reduction in census for students as a reason to pull back on school funding and other changes that the mayor's proposing around education. And so it may be that the administration has changed their response in order to kind of align with that broader argument that the census is wrong, and therefore, which is true. And therefore, citywide, there may be less demand for education. I think specifically at the high school level, that doesn't really apply to our district. In terms of clarifying, when I'm saying district, I'm saying District 2, which is the school board district we're in, school district we're in, as opposed to CB8, since our district lines don't really align. And my understanding is the DOE works off of the their own district lines, but so we are a subset of District 2, and District 2 has a lot of demand for high school spots. And so I think the general argument there is still quite valid. And Judy brought up, an idea that we could try to ask for a certain allocation of seats at the high school level to be made to either our District 8, or our education district, District 2. And I just don't see policymakers going in that direction. I think they really do want to have a more open selection or a school choice process at the high school level. So if we're going to alleviate some of the challenges we have in terms of students who live here not being able to attend school here, then I think it is going to come down to having more classroom space or another school of some kind. And then last comment, aside from high school, I think there is a lot of demand in the Upper East for the pre-K3 and pre-K4 programs. And so I don't know if that was a separate ask of ours, but just pointing that out as well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'll just say on all this that, we should be talking about school seats in terms of being a city of yes. If the mayor and the governor want us to have more housing, we need to anticipate that. And that's every possible infrastructure and social need. And so, putting aside the issue about high schools and how high schools are zoned, I certainly think for an elementary or middle school or both, we have a very strong case to make if they're looking to have more, residents and families in the district. So I don't know how often we've tried to pair those two ideas, but if we're thinking comprehensively, we probably should be doing that.
Okay, good point. Public housing, Judy, do you want to add anything before we move on?
One word, immigration. If we're getting all these immigrants and they were talking about putting them in our district, we certainly are going to need more seats.
Okay. Any comments or thoughts on the city's comment about public housing? If not, then DEP, we said we needed additional resiliency investments in the district to protect against future storms, and the city went back to the classic, we need more study. Barbara, as chair of the Environment Committee, do you have anything to add or any thoughts on that, on responding to that?
And you have a hand up from Ed Hartzog, but I'll unmute Barbara.
Okay, why don't we go to Ed first?
Okay, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I didn't get my hand up fast enough for the housing. I don't know. I see the comment in terms of contacting local elected officials. Is this, they're just kicking that back to Julie Menon and Keith Powers, or was that Liz Kruger? Senator Kruger and Councilman Powers would be very helpful allies on that. I don't know what any more guidance than that, or any thoughts anybody might have. I mean, obviously, it's a critical need. Certainly, I don't think anybody would argue with that.
I mean, I think it's a critical need citywide. And so the city should be investing more in public housing. And I'm not sure what the status is of their public benefit community trust or whatever the kind of privatizing initiative was, and how they're proceeding with it. I know it was a smaller scale, but it still doesn't address the whole need for additional investment in repairs to public housing. So thank you for your feedback. Judy, you have your hand up.
I have a question that I don't know the answer to. NYCHA, is that a state agency, a federal agency? If it's a state agency, why would we be going to our city council members, and we should be talking to the right person if we need more funding? We should go to the right city. And I don't know what NYCHA is. Is that city? Is that state? Is that federal?
I think it's, I mean, the real source of the funding, I believe, and where the cutbacks have been on the federal level, and that has been the biggest impact in the declines in public housing. But I think it is a city responsibility, not a state responsibility. It is a public authority. Craig.
And I think I'm muted.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Barbara.
Just in terms of the environment, we keep having meetings, and every time we have a meeting, I said, there's one more thing I'd like to add. I think the city is going to come this spring. I bumped into Red Agawala, and I think it's, and please, Will, tell me what you think. I think the city is going to come up with a lot of recommendations or laws or things like that in the spring. Do you agree, Will?
They usually announce a slew of climate-related legislation and actions around Earth Day. So, like, I think you can usually imagine that you'll hear a lot of press releases from DEP and the city about climate and resiliency, usually in April.
And what they would fund or not, I just don't know. We had a meeting on the 97, local law 97, which Will, thank you, it's not 197. And they're going to need more funding to do this. This is an expensive project, and I'm not sure what they're doing to help out. But we keep having meetings on different things, and having a study, I don't know, they just keep studying, and I'm not sure what else they can do. What I would have liked to say is that we need more money for charging stations, making sure that these batteries that blow up and kill people, that there are places for them to charge outside of an apartment, and things like that. And I think they are working on that, but I'm not sure if there's enough funding for it. And Will, please chime in if you agree or disagree, or.
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Okay. Next is Craig, and then Ed.
Hi, thank you. So in terms of resiliency funding, I guess where I'm struggling with the comment is, I don't know what additional study is necessarily needed, or maybe that is in fact the issue, that we need a study focused on our area. So if you recall, there was the East Harlem resiliency study in which the boundaries, I think, went down as far as 92nd Street. And we wanted it to be a little further, down to at least 90th Street. I don't know that it was ever officially done in that fashion, but I thought they sort of were unofficially looking at it. But the fact of the matter is, we know that we have some resiliency issues. We know that there are certain parts of our community district that are in a flood zone. We know that we see flooding on occasion, both from storms like Sandy or just rainstorms in general. So like right outside my window, we have an ongoing issue with a storm drain at the corner of 90th and East End, and that clogs up and that causes flooding around this area. That's a resiliency issue as well. So we do know that there are certain problem areas that could be identified that I don't know what further study is necessarily needed to identify them, maybe to develop solutions, but maybe we can make a request for that in conjunction with something that could be done more near term to address the issues that I've identified here and the issues that others have experienced that we know about when we have certain weather events taking place.
Thank you, Craig. That's very helpful. Next up is Ed.
Yeah, sorry to go back again to the housing. But I just want to make sure I was clear in terms of what we need to do. Again, back to the public housing, and notwithstanding the fact that the city needs it, that's great. But I'm concerned with the housing in our district, which in front of us is Holmes and Isaacs. So I didn't know if we'd come to a consensus as to, what we're doing as a result of this meeting and some of these responses to these budget items, whether there's some kind of resolution that's involved, whether or not there's an action item related to each of these items as well. So I guess what I was asking in a roundabout way is, have we come to some consensus that it's Councilman Powers and Councilwoman Menon, or or do we want to try to see if we could bring to bear anything with Senator Kruger? I mean, certainly the $2.2 trillion Build Back Better that was not passed. The word around town is that a lot of the money that was earmarked for public housing in the 40 billion or 50 billion, whichever number you care to believe as to the backlog, that money was in that bill. So that came from the feds. So, I mean, with that, that would then bring in Congressman Nadler, our new Congress member, representing the East Side, that is. So that's all I'm really asking, and going round and round in a rambling way. And then I won't keep coming back to housing. I'll let you keep moving on. But that was my comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. So the response to the city's comments is to write a letter that we have to have out by February 15th. And so this is into the letter. And I think the appropriate response is that we would still call on the city of New York to increase their funding to fund essential repairs and upgrades to the public housing in this district. I mean, even if we are reaching out to our local council members and state legislators, it's still an overall city responsibility, right. and they need to take action.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Adding on to that, there's a couple other things we can do. One is, we've made these requests before, and I believe some either last year or the year before, have been approved, or they did say, they were supporting, so we can look at that. I think maybe in the letter we can specify examples of the needed repairs, maybe in more specific language. And then I think in the housing committee, you can bring up this budget response and come up with a resolution calling for the support that you asked for.
Okay, thanks.
And Will, would it be possible if you could send last year's responses so we can kind of to the group so we can look at those as needed?
Yeah, I think Will just posted it in the chat.
I only found the letter. Yeah, I didn't find the actual document.
Give me 5 minutes. And it'll be on that link as well.
And then the next item, and I know this has been brought up before, the need for repairs at the 19th Precinct House. I think last year we just said air conditioning. This year we said we need an update on the entire building. And we noted, and this was to your point, Rebecca, that we said, because last year they said further study is needed. And so we said, please provide an update on the status of the study. And so their response was, further study is needed. So Judy, you have been really the person who was running point on communications with the 19th precinct about their needs. Is there any, so in our letter, we talked about the need for a new roof and other repairs. Do you have any other additional information that we could add in response to this, other than asking for a timeline of when they expect to do an assessment of the needs for rebuilding this precinct?
Haven't heard anything from the precinct about it. I guess you all know we just lost our precinct commander, promoted down to 1 PP, and we'll be getting a new one within the coming weeks. So the summers are particularly bad when the air conditioning isn't working. They're just not happy working there. What can I tell you? And it's a shame that we have to put our police through that.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Michelle, is there something you want to add? And I apologize for my dog.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this is a wastebasket answer. This is just a pro forma silly answer. We very specifically asked for air conditioning. There's really no big study that you need to do. They don't have adequate air conditioning. Anybody walking in the front door knows that. So frankly, these answers are a little insulting, but we have acknowledged that over the past years. For a city, and in the borough president's State of the Borough address, he very proudly announced, the borough president, State of the Borough, he very proudly announced that he has located about 171 city-owned properties that he hopes to use for affordable housing. Well, if this is an indication of how the city, this and NYCHA, if this is an example of how they maintain their properties, then I take no comfort that they're going to develop another 171. The likelihood of them being inhabitable is very low. So I think we ought to very seriously call the city out on that we have no confidence in their ability to maintain and care for properties that are within their jurisdiction and under their control, and that we resent these kinds of answers. So, however, I don't think we should necessarily be genteel about it, Felice, but I'll leave that up to you. But this is pretty outrageous.
Hey, thanks, Michelle.
I don't think the proposal, and I only say this to the extent that influences our next steps, I don't think the borough president's proposal was for it to be all public housing. As I read it, I think it's a proposal for mixed markets and affordable housing, using various ways to subsidize the affordable component. So, Michelle, I'm not sure the premise is quite right. So if that's the case, we can look into it, but I don't think we need to mention anything in our letter.
You don't have to use you don't have to use my statement as the background for our ask. But whether or not it's going to be city-owned housing, you may be right, Billy. However, it's going to be under the city's jurisdiction. It's their property currently. Whatever they do to it, unless they sell it off privately, which will take it out of their jurisdiction for what they want to designate it for. So I think no matter how they approach it, it's going to be somehow under their jurisdiction, whether it's joint with somebody else. But I think that it's appropriate to say to the city, whether or not you want to use that as a background, that these properties, which are under their jurisdiction, they need to set an example that they can maintain their properties. These are pro forma responses. I mean, this is not a legitimate response. I think we ought to call him out on it.
Thanks, Michelle. Can we move on to page 2? Will, when it refers to the community board unit at OMB for information, what does that mean? I mean, obviously, this is another way of blowing us off, but what specifically? I don't recall having seen this response in the past.
I don't recall seeing this response either. There is a small group of people who work at OMB who are responsible for answering community boards, but they primarily, I'm very surprised by this response. That's not what anyone would say that their job is.
Because I don't
make
really
decisions.
think they want us calling them and saying, you spent, I think, $1 million on a repair to a sinkhole on the Esplanade around 77th Street, and it's starting to sink again. And HSS is supposed to come in and do all sorts of cosmetic improvements to the Esplanade, but they can't really quite do that if the Esplanade is sinking, or it's really a waste of money. So I am really concerned about their response here. Rebecca?
I have a couple thoughts on this response. Number one is I think this is just a new way to blow us off. They couldn't say, a study is needed because they had already started. And if they were going to continue to support improvements, they would have said in a vague terms, the project will continue to be funded. So I think this is just you need a study, because I guess they don't want to be directly state that they don't want to fund this improvement because they had already started doing so. So they're just trying to not give us a legitimate or real answer. And I think we need to, they are saying that we have to contact them, but we can say in our response, that this continues to be a top priority and explain, highlight this in the letter.
Okay. And we were, Judy and I were talking to one of the folks at the Parks Department about the Esplanade and how much money we needed. And he said, oh, no, I think the project's fully funded. We're good. So perhaps that is not actually the case.
And that's really I think the language they would use is like, this project is like fully funded. So you're probably right that means it's not. Right.
Because the Roosevelt Island Bridge is a perfect example. I believe they have installed safety improvements on the bike lane on the bridge. Craig is shaking his head yes. So
yeah,
that is exciting that this is done, and we can remove it from our budget request and compliment the city for funding that. So this we put in, the board had approved a safe haven site for 91st Street. The city changed their plans on what they were funding and how they were funding it. Goddard walked away from the deal, and I'm not sure what the current status is or how we want to respond to our comment about putting in some kind of responsible shelter and supportive services in this district. Michelle, you have your hand up?
I think if you want to make a general statement, that's fine, but I think we should remove the safe haven comment because there are many issues with it, including a zoning one, and it's really still in discussion. And so I don't think that it should be mentioned by name here. But if you want to say much needed housing for the most vulnerable and end it there, that to me would be fine.
Okay, thank you. And Rebecca?
Oh, I'm unmuted. I also think their response is just not appropriate because part of the zoning issues that Michelle mentioned is safe havens are not permanent housing. So their response is not answering the request in any way.
Okay. And Barbara?
Okay, I think both of those responses are not fully correct. I know a little bit more. I know there's a lawsuit out and probably people on this community board are part of it. There is a discussion about zoning. If you speak to the city, I think they say the zoning is not the issue. There was an issue about how they really wanted to structure it. It's true, God had walked away. I have spoken to city people that say they are going to have something like a safe haven, or I think it sounds more like a shelter, which I'm sure the people on this call would be more thrilled with a shelter even than a safe haven. And I would like to continue something if you want to change the wording slightly, but just to push it off as we're not having it in our neighborhood, I think is something I would not be for. And I think it would be counterproductive because I think something is going to be in our neighborhood. So I would like, if you want to change the wording, but it is a complicated issue. There are lawsuits. Nobody quite, will talk about it. And what I hear is the zoning is really not the issue, even though there's a lawsuit about the zoning and so on. But the city has not said that they're not going to have something there. In fact, my contact has said there definitely will be something there. So I don't know how you want to word it, but to say take it away is not what I would want to do, and not what I think a lot of people would want to do.
Okay, thank you. Judy, and then Michelle.
I can't think of his name. The fellow who owns the store on Madison, the food person. And they have a store on the west side, the rest of the family.
Bar.
Hey,
Eli
Bar,
Zabar.
thank you. He was thrown out of court today on his lawsuit on Safe Haven. It came in late this afternoon. I got an email on it. So that lawsuit, the judge said, no, and threw it out. So I just thought I'd throw that in the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Judy.
If you're able to circulate that, by the way, Judy, that would be great. Or actually, maybe I found something. Okay.
There was a Cranes article about it.
Okay, thanks, Will. Michelle, and then
Yeah, actually, what I'm referring to is the name. A kind of facility could be put there that is doing exactly what this is doing, but it may not be called that. So I thought that to name it is not appropriate in number 7.
So a safe haven is not a generic reference, but a specific.
Well, it's capitalized. So I see it as capitalized, which tells me it's a name of something.
It's a type of shelter. It's a shelter that provides supplementary services. It's not a drop-in shelter. The drop-in shelter is where like a single male adult could go and just drop in every night. A safe haven is one that has supportive services that are designed to help somebody stabilize and then get on their feet.
So we don't know what, even though this might be a support institution or a shelter, at this point, we don't know what it's going to end up being. So to call it something doesn't seem right to me. To me, if you're asking for funding for needed housing for the most vulnerable of our residents, you can say such as safe havens or this or that, but I wouldn't necessarily call it something when that sort of means that if we don't have that, we don't want anything. I wouldn't be that specific considering the controversy. I don't see any reason for it. There's another way to say it and get your point across.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Rebecca, and then Barbara.
Yeah, I agree with what Will said. It's a type, and again, with their response was about permanent housing. I think we can make it vaguer, but I think we should state, preference for a safe haven, because the district needs and budget priorities are also kind of a reflection of our values and what we want the most. So I would hate to lose specifying the safe haven because, as Barbara said, I think I'm not sure if all board members who voted to approve the safe haven would feel comfortable with a different type of shelter there. And I think,
well, and I think to everyone's point, I think the concept was that if you were going to put some kind of facility there, that it should be one that provided supportive services for people to help them get back on their feet.
so maybe adding a line about the definition of a safe haven and how it is, why it is what we want.
I remember today's exercise is responding to their response. It's not about changing what we do next time. That's for September.
Yeah.
Thanks, Will. Okay, Barbara, and then we'll move on.
Now, I raised my hand before. I'm going to repeat it. If you want to put the word before safe haven, although I agree with Will, I think for those that are against the safe haven would be very much more against what the city is calling a welcome center, which as all my work I've done on this leads me to believe that it's going to be closer to a shelter than we probably would be comfortable. I am somebody that would live next door to a safe haven. I would not be comfortable with a shelter. I can just tell you from a personal point of view, I can't believe Eli's would be happy with a shelter. So I think keeping the wording is very important to do, to say this is what we want.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on. The next one is accessibility at the 67th Street branch of the accessibility at the Yorkville Library, Yorkville branch, which I believe is on 79th Street. NYPL supports the project and is currently in front-end planning with DEC, so I think that's fine. Okay, we move on to page 3. Upgraded accessibility at 67th Street. So Judy, you had brought this up as an issue. And Rebecca, if you want to comment before we move on to the 67th Street Library.
No, I'll wait to go after Judy. I raised my hand for this.
Okay, so we had requested accessibility at 67th Street Library. I know a lot of improvements have been made to that library, but Judy, you had noted that there were accessibility issues to the 67th Street branch. So could you expand on that since we got the kind of blow off answer?
Well, when you walk up the ramp and then you get in the front door, they have that, I don't know what you call it. It's not an elevator. It's like a chairlift that goes up 2 stories to take you to the main floor where there is an elevator to the second floor. That thing never works.
Okay.
I mean, it's constantly broken. So I don't know how you handle that. I mean, I don't even know replacing it is one thing, then it's going to break again. I don't know if it should be under expense item, allowing money maybe to keep it in good repair. That's a thought, maybe pushing it over. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay.
Rather than asking them to replace it, put money in the budget to have a repair.
Okay. Thanks, Judy. Rebecca? And then
yeah, I was just going to say, in whatever we decide, I hope we do mention this item specifically in the letter because, we go from the item before where it says the New York Public Library supports this project. Do we want to get like a letter of support from them or something? It was frustrating, particularly frustrating to see one thing, approved and then something asking for further study that seemed quite similar.
Yes, well, and I think it's clear that the Yorkville Library is not accessible at all. And they're making some, and that was one of their priorities that they mentioned when the public library came to us. As to Judy mentioned, the 67th Street Library technically is accessible. It's just that the accessibility doesn't work. So,
But then it's not accessible, right?
right. I think maybe what
If
I'll
it doesn't
do.
work, it's not accessible.
No, I agree. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll try to head over there and maybe take some pictures that can be included in our response. Moet?
Just to reiterate what Judy said, so I've had the same issue, taking a baby stroller up there where the, that like chairlift thing doesn't work. And at least in my case, there was some issue with the latch. So I don't know if that's like a simple fix or not, but it's just like the door doesn't latch properly. So the thing just won't go up or down until its door latches properly. So I've had that issue, a few times when I've been up there.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Okay, let's see. Other affordable housing programs. The agency will try to accommodate this issue within existing resources. I think this is a good opportunity to talk about the mayor and the governor's plan for 800,000 new units of affordable housing, because clearly that's a priority and we need affordable housing. So we can press on that. Bike path enhancements. I thought this was kind of interesting. They'll be reviewed as part of a federally funded bicycle network development program. Craig, do you want to take comment on this? Because I know this was an issue and it came up especially in response to that really a horrible incident where the young woman was killed in the bike lane or lack of bike lane on, what was it, 85th Street last year?
Right, yes. So this was a request where we had passed a resolution saying that we were looking to have essentially protected, protected crosstown bike lanes approximately every 10 blocks. And we were hoping that that could be done along the entire perimeter of Central Park, essentially, or at least on our side of Central Park. So that would mean a combination of upgrading some existing bike lanes and installing new bike lanes where there are gaps. And I guess based on their response regarding where they say bike path enhancement requests will be reviewed as part of the federally funded bicycle network development program. I don't know that that's telling us anything useful. I guess they're just suggesting that it's going to be in the pot for potential funding, but there's no indication of when or how much they would actually do. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where to go with that, and what their process is going to be for ranking different projects, because I'm sure we're not the only community district asking for bike lane enhancements.
Right, and have they applied for funding? Is this something that they need support for a funding request? So yeah, I think there are a lot of issues here.
And there are like outside of this document, there's another document that's just like way too big for everybody to be looking at, but it has like further comments, and usually the further comments are like, this requires a further study, and it's not actually that helpful. But in this one, the DOT did respond, the agency agrees with the request and will accommodate. So I know it's not that helpful, but if it makes people feel any better.
Okay.
That's a positive response.
Which they could have put in here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one is upgrades to John Jay Park, which is their odd response about contact the community board unit at OMB. I know Julie Menon has gotten funding for providing an accessible entrance to the multipurpose play area. And I think that provides some additional spillover into doing some portion of the central walkway, because I think when you turn the steps into some kind of ramp, you also have to do some work on the central walkway. I think we don't really have a sense of how far that is, but it is something that I think at least a portion of it is on the way of towards getting funded. Okay, move on to, oh, Judy, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think we have to leave that in there because Parks has ideas for John Jay, and we're trying to get them to make a presentation to us. But everything that I've spoken to Parks about, the money they have so far isn't going to cover it. So if they really want to redo John Jay and fix it up, the parts that weren't fixed, I think we're going to need additional funding.
Okay. All right, thanks. Rebecca?
Last year's response for this issue was OMB supports the agency's position as follows. This request is not recommended for funding. So I think we need to have strong language in our request.
Okay. Because they are in the process of working on getting to an accessible entrance. So we'll follow up on that. Thanks. And that was because Julie Menon got funding for it. It wasn't clear on how much the funding actually covers, I think is really the key issue. Okay, page 4. We wanted more rat-proof garbage containers in the area. And the city said they're sponsored by local officials, businesses, and community groups. So not something they're gonna fund. Although the Department of Sanitation could fund it, it is a capital expense. And I don't think it's only funded by local elected officials, although I know the ones in my neighborhood all say brought to you by your council member, your District 5 council member. Okay. Other street trees and forestry service requests. We wanted tree guards. This is under study or call the community board unit and we won't answer your call response. And I think this and some of the other parks comments, New Yorkers for Parks put out, I thought a really compelling statement about how not only is the mayor not meeting his campaign pledge of 1% of the budget funding towards parks, but is in fact actually declined the amount of funding that goes for parks. And so I think that would be something good to include in our response to this. Fund the return of the Queensboro Oval. I thought we took that out. And so I think that's not a priority or something that's ever going to happen. Judy, do you want to add anything to that?
No. She doesn't have to add anything.
Yeah, no, I think that was an issue that we had taken out. Okay, page 5. Funding for phase 3 of Andrew Haswell Green Park. I think we're still gonna continue to advocate for that. Fund the reconstruction of 24 Sycamore Park. I think it's something we still need to advocate for. Fund the reconstruction of Samuel Seabury Playground. So just overall, we've gotten after, I was going to say years, but really decades of advocacy, we have gotten a number of parks funded and moving forward in this district. Honey Locust Park is completed. Andrew Haswell Green Park, we're in the process of completing phase 2B. That should be done by the end of this year. Rupert Park, they have the funding in place. Hopefully they will be moving forward with letting the construction contract soon. So there has been a lot that's been accomplished. John Jay Park, a lot of work has been done. So we're moving forward on parks, and I think we need to start looking at some of the other parks in the district that are in need of some TLC. Judy, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, on Honey Locust Park, put the lower level of Honey Locust Park because it's got 2 levels. The upper level was redone where the comfort station is. They finally finished that last year, but the lower level needs to be redone. I can't read, this print is too small. I don't know if we had, Steve told us Seabury Park
That's
Playground.
in there.
Okay, because I can't read it. That needs to be redone as well. But I wanted to be specific on 24 Sycamores.
Wait, so you said we have 24 Sycamore and Samuel
The
Seabury.
lower level of 24
So
Sycamore.
that's for next year when we put our new response in, our new.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're not
yeah.
doing that tonight. Okay.
No, that's a September thing. Tonight we're responding to the
Okay.
city's response because
Okay, then
they put out
fine.
a preliminary budget and they give a moment to comment on it. So basically every September we put out our district needs statement and budget priorities, and that's going to the next fiscal year's budget. That the mayor releases his preliminary budget in January. And then we have 30 days to comment on that preliminary budget before it goes through the city council hearings and goes into adoption in June. So this is our chance to say to the city that their response to our request from last fall is not sufficient, and therefore they should prioritize it in the upcoming budget.
Then leave it just the way it is, but when we do it again, I would be more specific.
Okay, I'll make a note. I'm surprised, where am I? That with Rupert Park, they said contact the community board unit since we move this to continuing support, and theoretically they've said they have, that the project is fully funded, and that Julie Menon provided the funding last year for the comfort station as well. So I'm surprised by the response that says essentially contact us or needs further study since the project should be moving forward. So I think that's something we need to follow up on. Okay, and I guess moving on to page 7. Here's the 3K and pre-K seats, which we talked about earlier. Improve public housing, maintenance, and cleanliness. I'm not sure what further study, again, is probably nicer than saying contact the community board unit at OMB. But we'll look at what their response was to this request in prior years and address that. Summer youth employment programs, they have increased funding in this area, and I think that's great because kids need jobs. Page 8, this is kind of interesting. Increased funding for rodent extermination. And the response is this is a very broad request. I know Julie Menon has done a lot to address some of the rat burrows in the district. I'm going to say the rats always come back, so there's probably some need for additional funding for this, but I think this has been a priority for the city. Rebecca, is there something you want to add?
Yeah, I think we can mention that, right? We know this has been a priority, and we continue to stress this importance of this for our community.
Thank you. I will add that well, my computer seems to be doing weird things. I will add that I I have seen a decline in the number of my personal sightings of rats in the neighborhood. And so I will thank Julie Menon for her activities in that area. Sanitation, we asked for an additional recycling program, including enhanced funding. The response was, although the Department of Sanitation supports this program, due to fiscal constraints, the availability of funds is uncertain. Okay, I'm not sure how we want to respond to that. Michelle?
Yeah, I had my hand up for number 4. I noticed at the bottom it says East 96th Street. Julie was very instrumental and helpful on 86th Street. She used this machine that she went into the burrows of the tree pits, and she put this gas in there, and she did it all the tree pits and had tremendous success in getting rid of the rats. As you say, not to say they don't come back, but I just wonder where here we have a very specific address, 2nd Avenue and 96th Street. And we know that the parks have a rat problem, Rupert Park does, and so do a lot of the areas. So do we want to make that, and they call it a very broad request. And here we're just talking about, it says 96th and 2nd Avenue. That doesn't seem like a broad request to me. So do you want to leave their response and make it a broad request?
Yes.
So I think that that's just an error. I don't think that we actually stipulated a location. So number one, again, for next year's, which we'll talk about in September, we'll just make sure we don't put a location in it. But that, I think, is an error on their part about putting a location, because I don't think we've historically had a location for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then we're responding in what way to this?
You're responding to their response.
Yeah, so what are we saying is what I'm saying.
I think that we need to mention that this is a priority. It's been a priority for the city. He's hired or he's looking to hire a rat czar. This is an important citywide, and it's important for our community, and they need to continue to address reducing the rat population and
I think
rat burrows.
I think you can also put in that it's been increased with open restaurants, with many street vendors. I just got a picture from a constituent today with a rat under one of the food carts, which was disturbing. So I think if you're looking for an argument to make and why the city has to be vigilant about this, it's because one of the reasons is that the city's own programs have caused an increase in this, and they need to be responsible for it.
Can you send me that photo? Because I would like to include it in the letter.
Oh,
I don't really want to see the photo, but
you have to look under the cart and you'll see a rat sitting there very happily.
Okay, well, that is truly disturbing, but thank you. Okay. I think we talked about the rest of page 8, page 9.
You have 2 hands up from Craig and from Barbara Rudder.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Craig and then Barbara.
I just wanted to comment on recycling and garbage collection. So we did mention in their organic selection, and if you're not aware, the mayor did announce that they are going to be implementing a citywide curbside compost pickup program by the end of 2024. I think they said that Manhattan is slated to go in last of all boroughs in fall of 2024, but it's great in my mind that they announced it, but until it actually happens, I want to make sure that we do have that commitment in place. And I don't know if we want to comment on the initiative that was announced in response to what the response that was provided to us.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Barbara?
Just the rat problem. I've been hearing a couple of things, and I think I heard that the major culprit is all the construction that's going on. There isn't a block around where there isn't a building coming down and empty lots for years and years and years. And if you want to talk about reasons, I know Michelle cares about the fruit carts, the outdoor dining. I mean, yes, if there's food on the street, I guess there's some, but that's not raw fruit. It's evidently the breaking down of buildings and having the garbage that really is in these empty lots to be the bigger culprit. So I wonder if there's some way of saying something to be done about these empty lots. I think the owner of these lots should be responsible for it, but they're not. It's just a horrible situation in our area. Maybe more my area. I live on 2nd Avenue, 3rd Avenue. It's just nonstop destruction of buildings and garbage around and disgusting. The lots are disgusting.
Okay, so maybe we could also call for some kind of request that they encourage buildings to private lots to also do rodent control.
Right.
Thank you. And Michelle, do you want to add something?
My understanding is that the DOB already requires those doing construction to have rat mitigation. And whenever a developer comes before us at the community board, it's certainly always a question that I ask. They always say that they put big, rat traps and baits in their construction sites. We're not going to stop construction. So if you want to add a comment about construction, you may want to say to encourage the city to enforce that the developers are doing rat and rodent mitigation when they do their sites, when they construct.
Because when there's actual construction going on, they are required to do rat mitigation.
Yes.
Barbara's point is if the lot's sitting empty, I think.
Well, I mean, if it's a construction site, it's not sitting empty. Somebody demolished, and then I guess it depends from sometimes site, like look at the Solo site downtown, it's been empty for 20 years. So yeah, I guess that's true. But in terms of what the city can do about it as part of their rat mitigation issue, but also when there is construction, to encourage the enforcement of developers, of that rule. They have the rules, so we're asking for them to enforce it.
Okay, good point. Thanks. And Barbara, do you want to add something?
You said it. I was talking about the lots, and to say that they raise it and then build is just, look at 86th Street between 2nd and 1st Avenue all the way over to 85th Street. That has to be a minimum of 15 years that it's been that way. Very few, because what about the Lenox Hill site on 3rd Avenue and 80? They raise it and keep them empty for years. So maybe once they start building, it is. So we're talking about two different things, and I'm not going to continue the argument. Michelle wants to respond. I won't respond anymore.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, let's move on to page 9. Park maintenance and safety requests, and the need for year-round park workers. So I think this is what we referred to earlier, and I would refer to the New Yorkers for Parks comments about the decline in funding for the Parks Department in the budget. We request funding for services for older adults, including personal and home care. It says it depends on sufficient federal and state funds. I don't know if anyone has any response to that. We can reach out to Jerry Nadler as well as our state officials and call for increased funding on this. I do think we need to prioritize the funding for community boards and make a real emphasis on that, and maybe put that up front. It's something that we have talked about before. They're reiterating in the response this year what the community board's budget is, which we know, and that should be increased citywide. Now, Rebecca, do you want to add something? Because I know this has certainly been a hot issue for you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was, maybe Will can speak to it. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me of that number compared to the prior fiscal year, but their response is not asking, for the question, is not answering the question, which is we need more than what they've allocated to us in years past. And I don't believe there was a massive increase.
There has not been an increase.
And
So
how long
I
has
think
it
we
been?
should use the number.
And Will, how long has it been since there's been an increase?
We should contact the community board unit at the OMB to get that information. I'm sorry for being snarky, but that is
a
actually
good
information that's the one time that would have been relevant. They actually would know. The community board unit at OMB would actually be able to tell us over a 10-year period the community board budget, excluding rent, because all the community boards have different rent budgets. But they could tell us, the community board budgets over the last decade. They have not changed meaningfully.
Do you think there's a way? I mean, we can try and get that answer before the letter. It might be tight.
It might be, and I can certainly ask, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever asked that. I tell everyone this: the city council a couple of years ago gave us an initiative of funding, gave community boards an initiative of funding for $2.5 million for all 59 community boards, and that equals the starting salary of a community associate. So for $2.5 million, the city could give 25% more staffing power to every community board by baselining $2.5 million to all 59 community boards as a whole. So I think saying something like that is also very effective. Is just putting it in context that it's such a tiny amount of the city budget could have such a meaningful change.
Yeah, I agree. And then I'll stop commenting on this. I just think the response has to have numbers and be specific. And hopefully we can include both what Will said and possibly getting the info about how much it has probably not ever been increased significantly over the past 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. And I like your stat about $2.5 million is 25% increase in staff. An increased funding to support food pantries.
You have two hands up still, Judy and Michelle.
Judy and then Michelle.
Yeah, I want to go back to item 7. I'm sorry. Are we just leaving that comment as it is? Contact the community board unit of OMB on the parks?
No, I think we're going to take the data from the New Yorkers for Parks response and include that in our response.
Yeah,
here.
because he was going to put, when he was running for office, I'm giving 1% of my budget to parks. And now, not only didn't he do that, he cut it to less than half of what the budget was from his predecessor.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make a comment. If you said that, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Not a problem, but yes, I was going to refer to that data. Okay. And Michelle and then Gail.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as part of a talking point in the response for the for an increase in community board staff and facilities, if we are going to be, and hopefully they're really going to ask us to be participants in the City of Yes process. And with that, there's going to be a lot of zoning and land use issues. And we really should have increased funding to make sure we maintain a staff that's able to support you know, the research needs and what the community board needs in order to take an active role in that process. So I think that the staffing would be very important.
Okay, that's a good point, Michelle. Thank you. And Gail? Are we unmuting Gail?
Gail's unmuted. She may be muted on her own end. Do you have like headphones or anything that's? Do you have maybe Bluetooth headphones that may be connected to your device? No. Okay. Try leaving and coming back, and that often fixes it.
Okay, so we will, and you know, it's funny because item number 10 on page 9 was really Gail's issue. So hopefully when she comes back in, she can talk to that. Page 10. And we talked about increased funding for audible, accessible crossing signals for intersections. The city said installation will be considered for locations based on multiple criteria. Please supply a list of specific locations. Craig, do we have a list of locations? I know this has come up through the transportation committee before.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I thought we had given more of a description of the locations that we were looking for. I think we said something like near schools and hospitals. Don't quote me on that, but something of that nature. So,
so would it be in some of the committee minutes or a resolution?
Yeah, it would have been in there for sure.
Okay. I'll take a look.
Yeah, let me see if I could pull it up. I know I can find it pretty quickly.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we talked about restoring Sunday service to one library. NYPL is in favor of this project, but added or restored city funding is required for all expense budget requests and any capital needs. Okay, so we can call for increased funding. Rodent extermination within all parks, contact the community board unit. So we'll have to emphasize the need for increased parks funding. And funding for mental health and other services. It's included in the 10-year plan, but I don't really know what that means because I know the 10-year plan, I would feel more comfortable if that was included in the current plan. Rebecca, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think we have to address that. And, you know, it's kind of similar to like, you know, we support this project, but, you know, funds might not be available at this time or something, where we thank them in the letter, you know, for agreeing with us in better language. I think we need to be specific and say, you know, we appreciate their support of this and that it's in the 10-year plan, but we either need more information or, you know, how soon is this going to start?
Okay, thank you. And Craig.
Yeah, the resolution called for locations near subway stations, hospitals, schools, houses of worship, and other major community institutions.
And what minutes was that in, or what agenda?
April 2022.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, page 11. Fund accessible and affordable out-of-school time and daycare programs for all children in schools. The city's responses, there are a variety of agency-funded programs. Additional programs are contingent upon available funding and will be distributed through an RFP process. Do we have any specifics on this issue that we might want to respond to? Okay, if not, move on. additional PEP officers to enforce park rules in all districts. Again, this is another ask the community board unit. So we'll get back to the whole issue. I think maybe I'll group these responses and get back to the issue about the decline in funding for parks and our concerns about that. Provide additional funding for children's services, especially programs to prevent abuse and neglect. They say call ACS and check out their services. I'm not sure if anyone has a specific response to that. And then fund additional DOT inspectors for enforcement of the outdoor dining program. And the agency will accommodate this issue within existing resources. So maybe this also gets incorporated into our rat issue. I know, Michelle, this has been a big issue of yours. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, well, this also has to do with the regulation of the sheds. Now that there's the temporary program, they're trying to move it to become the permanent program. And frankly, they have not been very specific about what their ultimate aim is. Some of their presentations call for all sheds coming down, for there being no sheds, and for there not being any pallets on the street that street or dining furniture would stand on. That's meant to address the rodent problem. In other words, to put the furniture directly on the sidewalk or street so that rodents can't gather under it. So this is regulation enforcement of the outdoor dining program includes the sheds. It also includes addressing concerns that the emergency services have. At council testimony, the fire department testified on two issues. Number one, that they did not, because they were addressing the fact that it's proposed that this program become year-round, and the fire department addressed the fact that using and storing propane tanks, they deemed dangerous and they were not for that. And the other problem was that a fire truck can't necessarily make the turn onto a street if a shed protrudes too much and is too close to the corner. So enforcement of the regulations for sheds are on many levels. There's also a discussion of where to put the garbage pickup, because ordinarily the garbage is put out in front of the storefront within their imprint. Now, if there's a shed there, where do you put the garbage? If it's being hidden by the shed, the truck has a hard time getting to it. If you move it to the curb too soon, there are a whole bunch of issues. So in terms of enforcement, there's the structure of the shed, whether or not they will exist, what they're doing to make sure that they comply with the 12-foot rule. There's a whole list of issues that they will be called upon if a restaurant has outdoor dining, that they will be called upon to comply with, and therefore there will be a lot of things to enforce. So they have to, the interesting thing here is they really have to define the issue. At the moment, they don't even know what the issue is because they haven't really defined the final protocol for these outdoor facilities. So I don't know how, you maybe you want to list like an IE, such as structure, garbage collection, rodent mitigation, street, you don't want to put a term like street clearance, clearing the pedestrian right of way. There are a whole lot of things that they're going to have to enforce when this thing happens again. And they actually didn't bother to enforce it when it first came in as a temporary program. I mean, and the DOT practically said that, they really didn't have the means to enforce it. And it was an emergency situation because of COVID. But certainly going forward, if this has really become a part of street life in the city, there's an awful lot they're going to have to do, and they really would have to show that they have enough of an enforcing mechanism to make this healthy and safe for everybody.
Those are good points, Michelle. Thank you. Okay, moving on to page 12. So I guess this is really a similar issue, increased funding for the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to enforcement of all food vendor rules. I mean, this is slightly different because these are food vendors instead of the outdoor shelters. And I think the point here perhaps is the photo you have of the rat underneath the food vendor, that there's definitely a need for increased enforcement and sanitation. Is there something you want to add, Michelle?
Let me just say this. I don't know whether or not you want to put it into this, as Will states, maybe it's for next time. I don't know. Let me just throw it out there. When a vendor gets his license renewed, a chip is now being put on each of the carts so that they have this technology. And this technology would be so helpful if they could put it into use, both to determine whether it's a lawful location for the vendor, if the vendor's compliant, all kinds of things. It's supposed to go back to their commissary every 24 hours to be cleaned, and also to bring their garbage. A chip could decide, could let the police know whether or not they did that. And it would, in some way, it would change the need for a massive foot vendor patrol squad, because you could take a lot of it, and put it electronically. Now they have the capability of doing this. They're putting the chips on the carts, but it seems that nobody wrote the program. So nobody has put this into use. So there's a lot of enforcement that needs to be done. You see double the amount of space. Everybody's supposed to have an 8-foot table. They have 16 feet. You're not allowed to put fruit in the fruit beds, and they do. All this needs enforcement. They would have a way to do it. They have a very small enforcement squad. It's about 15 there's two agencies. It's the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and the DCA also. The DCA didn't used to be an enforcing agency, but now it is, but they sort of shared jurisdiction. So, I don't know how more, if you want to put that in a response, that they have a system in place, and we hope that they can, put in, talking about the chips, that they can have programs that could put that to use. Or if you want to save that for our recommendations later, there is a bit of a crossover. So I don't know, however you want to handle it. But there is a way to get this more efficient.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Okay. The next one is related. The new Department of Consumer Affairs is now Department of Consumer and Worker Protection for regulation enforcement of mobile food vendors and outdoor dining. So that's tied into your comment before. Additional funding to expand the truck traffic enforcement unit. The city's response is NYPD has a specific budget headcount and is working on filling vacancies in order to get to that headcount. So I don't know if there's anything additional we want to say, or whether we want to talk about commercial parking spaces or add anything to that. Okay, moving on. Increase the number of workers to inspect, repair, and preserve DOT's infrastructure. I'm not sure if we have specific comments or suggestions about that. Illegal conversions of buildings, hire additional DOB inspectors for compliance and code enforcement for illegal signage, and hire auditors for applications. Do we have specific issues or comments that we want to refer to there? Okay, moving on to page 13. We requested additional traffic control agents, an increase in enforcement of parking placard review, enforcement. I saw an article recently that the city was doing something about this. They said they're working on filling vacancies in order to get to the increased headcount. Do we have any additional suggestions about this? Because I know parking placards has been, abuse of that has been a real issue for this community. Craig?
Well, we just passed a resolution actually that where we were suggesting that essentially the traffic, the parking enforcement agents be able to do or take a lead on enforcement of parking placards. I don't know how that plays into it, but.
Okay. I'll take a look and maybe refer to the resolution.
Yeah, that was just last month.
Okay, thank you.
And just if you can go back for 1 second, for the for 22, that's something that we've had, I believe, on an ongoing basis in our district needs statements, for essentially state of good repair and for our infrastructure. So I don't know that there's anything to further add to that. And I don't know that we have anything specific.
Okay, thank you. On page 13, we requested funding for eviction prevention services for at-risk seniors. They said it depends on sufficient federal and state funds. So I don't know enough about this issue, but maybe this is something that the appropriate committee might want to write a letter to our local officials or our federal and state officials requesting additional funding for this. Increase of funding for more permanent housing for homeless people. I think we talked about the need for affordable housing and safe haven type facilities in this district. Install new trees were missing. I think that gets to the overall decline in funding for parks. I'm not sure, but it would be interesting to reach out to the community board unit at OMB with all the items that say reach out to the community board unit at OMB and see if anyone actually takes our call. On page 14, if there's nothing more on page 13, page 14, create grants, low interest loans, and other financial supports to assist small businesses in adapting to and recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. And their response was the agency will accommodate this within existing resources. I think we might want to continue to say something about support for our continued support for our small businesses, critically important and is a foundation for the strength of our economy. I don't know if anyone else has anything else they want to add to that. And then finally, we talked about the need for the Board of Elections to have election day support. And they said the community board has a budget of $257,000, which is correct, but doesn't really respond to our issue about making sure that the Board of Elections had sufficient support on election day. Are there any other questions or comments? Rebecca?
I was wondering about the letter and putting it together, if maybe you would send it around or if it can help.
Yes, I will try to get something done fairly quickly and send it around so folks have an opportunity to comment on it. So that is a good suggestion. Boaz?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's a budget meeting, right? So where are the numbers other than the community board date that they wrote $250,000? Shouldn't we eventually see Excel with numbers? What was the budget last year? How much we asked? Or eventually we're not talking about numbers, just requests? That's my first question. My second question, my suggestion to the community board is that I've been involved in those meetings for the last 2 years, at least as the public viewer, and something is broken here. To me, at least from my perspective, this is the most important thing, because you're talking about the most important thing: education. We need more budget for enforcement, and so on and so on and so on. But there is like a broken communication. We fill up some kind of a form, we send it out, then they fill up answers. And I think that we should demand that for each one of, again, you guys created like a list of 100 items, maybe top 5, top 10 items, have a dialogue with the decision makers. Okay, regarding the enforcement, what Michelle was saying, bring the guy there from the budget city or whoever is, and let's sit with us, and we can explain to him what we want. He can tell us, okay, it's going to cost this. Have some kind of a dialogue other than just we send them something, they send us back. I don't see where it's going. Maybe I'm missing something. That's it for my end. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the concept of trying to talk specific numbers, and that we want, X number of dollars, or it's, X percentage of the budget. Unfortunately, that's not kind of information that we have. But I do think we request specific sorts of things that we want funded, and to the extent that this process is actually set forth in the charter about how we respond to things. But I think the important point is that this is one of many tools that we use to advocate for what those needs are in our district. And I think it's also something that our local council members look to see what's important in the community that they provide increased funding for. And I think that they've heard from us before in that respect. We have gotten a response on funding a number of issues, not all of the issues, but definitely things that we want to see in the community. So Rebecca, do you want to add anything? Because I think you have a bigger picture perspective on this as well.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Yeah, I would just add, so when we submit these requests, it's alongside with our district needs statement, which we're mandated to do, right, every year. And that kind of summarizes everything we have heard and discussed throughout all of the different committee meetings and all of the full board meetings and land use meetings. And it's kind of a profile of what we need the most. So I totally hear you, budget, you think numbers, but you can also always come to our internal, our other budget committee meetings. When we deal with our community board budget, we have those spreadsheets with the numbers. This is more of kind of a reflection of our goals, our interests, and what we think the community, what we've heard the community, say they need the most.
Thanks, Rebecca. So if there are no other comments, do we have a motion to adjourn from Michelle? Great. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate everybody's feedback. We'll take this to provide our response, and have a great evening.